Hey guys, welcome to another class of Spain facing the 21st century. Today we're going to be finishing with this part of Pepe tackling the crisis, and we're actually going to be talking about the crisis. Remember that a week and a half ago, we talked already about the beginning of the crisis, of the economic crisis, and how it was handled by Zapatero government between 2008 and 2011. How at the beginning the government was not really recognizing the crisis, but as soon as they got re-elected in 2008, they put in place a very modest austerity plan, and after that, well, labor market reform, more austerity, and 2011 they had to call snap elections as they were unable to pass the budget and confront the economic crisis. And with these elections, we knew from last class that actually Mariano Rajoy, Partido Popular, won the elections with an absolute majority, so they had full control to tackle the crisis. So today we're actually going to talk, well, first half of the class, we're going to talk about the economic policies that were put in place by Mariano Rajoy. We already know the outcome of the crisis, but we'll continue next week with that. And we're also going to briefly talk about home politics and what other policies were passed at that time, during this period of time in Spain. However, you already know that actually the agenda was highly determined by the economic crisis itself. So we left it here. If you look at the screen, around this time was when Mariano Rajoy got elected president. So the economy was decreasing once again, and it was necessary. We also saw the figures of unemployment. So actually, we were still in big trouble, so to say. At this time, other countries were already coming out of the crisis. For example, the United States or France or Germany, but the other economies like Spain and Italy were not. And actually, there was an aftershock in this economic crisis. So if we talk about the economic policies that were put in place by Mariano Rajoy government, we definitely have to talk about the labor market reform of 2012. Actually, it was more or less of a continuation of the Zapatero reform. It took it a step forward, a clear step forward. The first measure that was introduced by this labor market reform was that dismissal will be cheaper. Actually, the compensation that employers will have to pay employees if they dismiss them, it will be less than they used to have. So by the end of the day, this will help. This was in a sense to encourage employers to take risks by hiring, so they will not be disincentivized by the cost of dismissing employees. Also, economic dismissal was eased. Before it was basically a matter of proving that companies were losing money. They had no profit in a year, 3 trimesters in a row. In this case, was actually just a decrease on the economic activity. If we could show, which was almost every single company in Spain at this time, the dismissal will be lawful, so the compensation to be paid to the employee will be much, much less. Also, new contracts were introduced. In this case, is a training contract, is what we call formación. So what's the difference here? The purpose of the contract is meant to be different. It's meant to be, on the one hand, of course, this is going to provide with some workforce to the companies, but at the same time, this is going to help this person that normally will be in a young age to learn the business, and actually the protection that the labor market protection that this employee has is much less than a regular employee. So actually it will be cheaper for the employer to hire this kind of person, and also the risk will be also smaller. And last but not least, temporary contracts. This was a big problem actually in the Spanish labor market. And the way this labor market reform tried to tackle it was actually by forbidding, it suspended the norm that actually for after 2 years of temporary contracts with the same company, that person become a fixed-term employee, and this will not be anymore the case. So companies could resort to temporary contracts without any problem. So what else was done from Rajoy's government during the economic crisis? Actually, the largest austerity plan, 65 billion to be saved in 2-year period. How? First, reform was increasing VAT. VAT used to be 18% in Spain. Now, since this reform in 2012 was 21%, so 3 points more, and actually that's already a lot of money coming into coming into the state, because by the end of the day, the problem here is that we were not collecting enough money through taxes because less people were working. Out here, I'm talking income tax. So other alternatives will be necessary, and in this case, will be related to consumption. Also, in the austerity plan, worker salary was already moderated, lower, and this was another measure that also Zapatero took in 2010. And also, last but not least, less unemployment benefits. The level of unemployment benefits was reduced because by the end of the day, the state was not able to pay it all, could not confront all the public debt. Last but not least, regarding economic policies of the Rajoy government, the banking sector bailout. And this is very interesting because by the end of the day, other countries in Europe did request the European Union for a bailout, as for example, Portugal, Greece, or Ireland. And in return of that bailout, by the end of the day, borrowing money from the European Union, they will have to implement austerity plans, and whatever was dictated by Brussels, this government will have to follow. However, our Spanish bailout was not exactly the same because it was a banking sector bailout. So 100 billion euros were made available for Spain to bail out its banks, and conditionality was not directly attached to this money. As you can see, Spain, by the end, they used 54 billion euros to bail out the banking sector. You remember, this banking sector was exposed to the by the end of the day to the house market, and because of these second properties became toxic assets, they were unable to finance themselves, the banks, and there even a risk of the banks defaulting, and this will be a much bigger problem for the economy. So what the state did was restructuring the bank sector through FROB, what we can see here. They took all the toxic assets of the banks and they put them in one bank to try to refinance this debt and try to find buyers for this debt. And while they left all the non-toxic assets for other banks to take over, other Spanish banks to take over. Eventually what happened here is that after lending 54 billion euros to banks to kind of, by the end of the day, to clear its finance, to make them healthy, 42 of those 54 billions will never recover. And this is a big problem for Spanish economy. I mean, by the end of the day, is the people that that rescued the banks in Spain, even though this was obviously money coming from the European Union, but this money will have to be returned, and it was not. So this is more or less the economic policies that were implemented by the Rajoy government during the economic crisis, as you know, as we saw on the previous slide, from 2014, and also in the other class, from 2014, the economy, the GDP started growing, also unemployment started falling, and things were looking better in Spain. And between 2015 and 2020, we sustained, and we'll see it in next class, continuous growth between 3 and 2%, which is rather healthy for what other economies in the Eurozone were doing. So we're going to have a break now, and we'll continue with home politics in just a second.